The word punk in fantasy literature has changed a little bit over the years. You've heard of some of them: Cyberpunk, Steampunk, Gearpunk, etc. But what about Solarpunk, Biopunk, or Silkpunk? What are they and what do they look like in a D&D game for a unique campaign setting? Well, I have done the work for you, and by the end of this video, we will go over 25 different punk genres.
But Riker, if you just wanted to play a different genre, you should just play a different TTRPG.
Shh. 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 Hello, Acolytes! Welcome to the Cleric Corner. My name is Riker, and here we talk about all things Dungeons & Dragons, tapping into our higher powers to create worlds more unique and stories more impactful. At first, the word punk in literature, wow. Now, at first, the word punk in literature, it meant individuality, nonconformity, and rebellion from the pop culture of the mid-70s, becoming a label for dystopian settings. Now, it is just a slap-on label for most sci-fi fantasy subgenres, mostly set in the past era with a futuristic twist. But you're not here for a history lesson on the word punk. You want to know how to bring each of these into your fantasies and your Dungeons & Dragons games. Well, this video will specifically be introductory to all these genres, but if you want to see more an in-depth video of how to create a D&D campaign on each of these genres, give the video a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below. But let's get to it. Starting in alphabetical order, we have Aetherpunk, a setting that mixes technology with high magic. Architecture usually including gilded gold and stained glass windows, sky ships, and magic being a very physical thing. Magic is everywhere and usually used as power sources for batteries and arcane contraptions. In D&D, there's actually a setting in Aetherpunk, such as Eberron or Ravnica. In other media, you can take inspiration from League of Legends, Arcane, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, or Adventure Time. Next, we have Afropunk, which mixes high technology with African culture. It may be obvious, but Wakanda, from the Marvel character Black Panther, is a perfect example of this setting. In your case, it could be a city or an entire planet where African culture was the dominant force. Unfortunately, it hasn't seen much else as far as the media goes, but there are many other cultures that would be fun to explore as well that is underrepresented. So here I will add Punkistan, which brings technology to Mongolian or Near East inspired culture, and Mesopunk, which Mesoamerican aesthetics are taken to a sci-fi or magical extreme. Really take any culture in the world today and have fun imagining it in an alternate future with them. Just remember to be respectful to the culture and do your research to celebrate them rather than to dive into stereotypes. Now we go to an Apunkalypse setting. A world driven to apocalypse, but still having elements of magic and technology. Deserts filled with broken technological machines and scavengers that take advantage of that. The technology in use is usually cobbled together in a DIY project, but still very dangerous. In D&D, Dark Sun would be a famous setting for this one. In other media, you can find inspiration in Mad Max, Tatooine in Star Wars, Borderlands, or Fallout. Another subgenre would be scavenger punk, aka junk punk, which are repurposing materials often in the small scale and depicted often in animal-focused movies. So things like Bug's Life, Flushed Away, or fantasy creatures from the Spiderwick Chronicles. Very Honey, I Shrunk the Kids type vibes. With that, we can explore Atompunk, which usually is a mid-century modern style and shines with nuclear power. Usually includes bubble domes, hover cars, and glittering cities. Other names for Atompunk is Raypunk and Castlepunk, though usually the only difference is these ones have different power sources than nuclear. But in the D&D sense, why couldn't that source just be magic? Inspiration in media could include the Jetsons or Futurama. Next, we look at Biopunk, a lot like Cyberpunk, which we will get to in a minute, but this time we focus on biological hacking, genetic modification, and organic enhancement. Technologies like genetic tracking, designer babies, and cloning are a heavy influence. Bioengineering is the science of choice, and even that can be the power source itself. Jurassic Park kind of dabbles in this, but better examples would be Sunny's Edge from Love, Death, and Robots, the movie Splice, and Prometheus from the Alien series. Even Frankenstein could technically be considered biopunk, but a subgenre of biopunk could be Anthropunk, which is basically a world of furries, which humans are all different forms of anthropomorphic animals, whether by science or by other means. A non-furry example would be Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now we have a fun one with Bronzepunk, also known as Sandalpunk, taking from the age of sundials, sandals, and columns into a retro-futuristic superpower. It is closely tied to Egyptian culture, but doesn't always have to be. Think the age of Aristotle or Plato. But did you know that the Romans invented steam engines, but then had no clue what to do with them, so that they never pursued the technology? Now you get to imagine what it would look like if they did. Examples in media would be Disney's Atlantis, Prince of Persia, and the movie Gods of Egypt. If you like superheroes, you will like this next genre, Capepunk. It depicts a world of superheroes, but specifically can be a modernization or a realistic depiction of them. It is a deconstruction of traditional superhero tropes. I'd say that it also includes a reconstruction, possibly introducing what superheroes would look like at different time periods. Like, what would Superman look like in the Shang Dynasty China? Or what would Batman look like in Renaissance England? But mostly you will find inspiration of this trope in movies like Project Power, Hancock, or The Boys. But next we move to the renaissance of Castlepunk, a retro science fiction using middle-aged technology. Still having the corset, umbrellas, wigs, and suit coats, but with a magical twist. Also known as Middlepunk, Plaguepunk, Candlepunk, or Dungeonpunk. There's a lot of them, but the latter is usually combined with more Aetherpunk, where D&D is usually set in. There is elements of this in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, but the best example of this I found, as it's very rare, is the girl in the fireplace episode from Doctor Who. But now for one that more people have heard of, Cyberpunk. The granddaddy of all punk genres. Very industrial and gritty, often to the expense of the privacy of the citizens. Surveillance and control is often the result of vast technological leaps. Think neon, holograms, cybernetics, and technological augmentations to the body. A subgenre of cyberpunk would be nanopunk, which is usually self-explanatory, but can also include humans becoming the size of microorganisms like Ant-Man or the Magic School Bus. Other cyberpunk examples in media include The Matrix, Blade Runner, Altered Carbon, or the new Magic setting, Kamigawa. Decopunk is an interesting one. Gritty and dark, but also celebrates the Art Deco styles popular in the 1920s to 1950s. High fashion with zoot suits and dresses. It is often compared to Dieselpunk, but shiny. This can also include tanks, fighter planes, as World War II was around this time. But I definitely think Decopunk is coined uniquely by its art style. Probably the best choice example would be the game Bioshock, but also it would fit The Incredibles or The Rocketeer. On the darker side of Decopunk, we have Dieselpunk, taking industrialization to the extreme level with both World War I and World War II to back it up, but generally toward the beginning of World War I. Technology is mainly intended for war only. Think big metal machines and diesel engines billowing black smoke. Examples can include Captain America: The First Avenger, the movie Iron Sky, or the board game Scythe. Now, even though certain genres lend themselves to certain power sources or technologies, it doesn't mean that you have to stick to them. You may not want to bring gas-powered machines into a D&D game, so make Dieselpunk, but instead of diesel, you have magic or biomaterial. Same with Cyberpunk. It's not electricity, it's Minecraft Redstone. You know what I mean, but what I'm trying to say is that each of these genres can easily be melded into a sword and sorcery game by simply making the source magical. In fact, I'm doing all of this to help your games be unique and give you out-of-the-box options for your world building. Starting this month, I have a monthly magazine for all my patrons who are supporting me on Patreon, providing these kinds of inspiration. With this month's theme being the beginning, I have provided pages of roll tables including these genres that you can either build a world from the prompts or roll randomly to see what you get. That, along with character prompts for players, an Oath of Adventure subclass, and other brainstorming activities. If you aren't a patron, you can still get it on my website, link below in the description. But let's get back to it. A definitely interesting one. Next, we have Dreampunk, coined by the surreal imagery, esoteric symbolism, and dream logic. There is often hidden symbolism and plays with the question of consciousness. It may include elements of many punk genres, but juxtaposed in an unnatural way that may or may not be explained. Mental illness, drug use, or divine visions can all be a basis of a Dreampunk setting. Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, and Never Ending Story are all sources of inspiration for you. An arguable subgenre would be portal punk, which would include isekai-like fantasies. The Feywild is a perfect setting for your D&D game for this. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Jumanji, Stranger Things, or the TV series Sliders would all be good examples of portal punk. Which now brings us to Gothic Punk. Dark and mysterious, but often set with early 2000s architecture, big metropolis, and dark, brooding, supernatural elements. It is also known to have a lot of Christian elements of angels and demons as well, but not always. Vampires can also make their appearance often here. Blade, Lucifer, Hellboy, Underworld, and Constantine are all examples. The show Gotham would be a Gothic punk without as much supernatural influence. This next one may be arguably darker, at least it unnerves me a lot more. Mannerspunk, a setting focused on social hierarchies and complex traditions. Not the progress of scientific technology, but political technology. Often set in the Regency period of the 1900s, it is the fantasy of manners. Unfortunately, there isn't many examples in the film media around Mannerspunk, correct me if I'm wrong, but Bridgerton comes to mind as a very prevalent example. And then if a title of a book looks anything like this, you know the genre. But don't be afraid to really stretch out the magnitude of social politics. As an afterthought, maybe the Divergent series maybe implements this a little bit as well. But up next, we have Modempunk. Set in the 70s and 80s aesthetics, it is a love letter to the cassette tape and floppy disks. Often accompanied with bright colors, blocky computer screens, and postmodern architecture. Usually a lot of unnecessary blinking lights on computer desks, but also called cassette futurism or Formica punk. Great examples is Back to the Future 2, Cowboy Bebop, the TVA in Loki, and weirdly, Star Wars A New Hope, just aesthetically. Because it's basically just what the 70s and 80s thought the future would look like, made into reality. Now moving to a genre that is very popular, but relatively new, Mythpunk. It blends mythic fantasies into urban reality. Take any classic folklore or fairy tale, add postmodern techniques, and you have Mythpunk. In some instances, I've also seen it described as queer-focused with bold exploration of sexuality. While urban fantasies explored what fantasies would look like in a modern world, Mythpunk often takes those to an extreme. Great examples would be Once Upon a Time, the TV show, Disney's Onward, and Pan's Labyrinth. I also think American Gods might fit into this as well. But our next genre literally changes the face of the planet. With Oceanpunk, it is often an apocalyptic setting where everything is flooded. Think Apunkalypse, but water. It can often bring a lot of Pacific Islander imagery, but doesn't necessarily have to. There can be both nomadic ship settlements as well as underwater settlements. It can also bring more of a pirate punk if certain elements are obviously included, but take inspiration from the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Waterworld, or Blue Submarine No. 6. And now one of my favorite kind of punks that I really want to play, Solarpunk. Not to be confused with Ecopunk, which is basically a cyberpunk setting with more farms and open sky, but capitalism is more often used. In Solarpunk, it is more socialistic or communistic and focuses on environmentally friendly technology with the green movement. Think a whole society based on solar energy and often portrayed as utopian societies. 3 subgenres would be Lunarpunk, still focusing on renewable energy but with hints of Wiccan magic and bioluminescent mushrooms. Another would be Tidalpunk, which is focused more on hydropower, and then another, Flowerpunk, where biomaterial like flowers are the main energy source. Examples in media might include Treasure Planet in some areas, Wall-E, or Tomorrowland. The next one is a big one, Steampunk. Well known, but it actually has many subtypes. It was actually the second punk that came after Cyberpunk, but this time all about Victorian era and technology based on cogs, gears, and steam power. Gearpunk would be the steampunk, though without the steam. And even a subtype of that, Clockpunk, that focuses on old suitcases, phonographs, and typewriters. Another subgenre is Teslapunk, where the steam is replaced by clean electrical energy. And then Castlepunk, which specifically takes place in the American West. Think a Doctor Who episode, A Town Called Mercy, or Cowboys vs. Aliens. But as far as steampunk goes, just take any technology and make it steam powered. Most inspiration includes League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Wild Wild West, Hugo, and Mortal Engines. But now Silkpunk is yet another subgenre of steampunk, but different enough that I'll expand on it here. Instead of Western influence, it is Eastern influence. They trade in their Victorian steamships and Ironsides with battle kites, weaponized fireworks, and futuristic Chinese junks, and terracotta or wooden automatons. Mix in Asian herbal law, Chinese gods, and immortal emperors. Take inspiration from Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Legend of Korra. I couldn't find any other good examples, so if you have any, please let me know. Going on to the next genre though, we have Skypunk. Take everything that you have below and put it up in the clouds. Not only planes and blimps and floating skyports, but also floating islands and walkable clouds. Not that that means that everything has to be in the sky and that the ground is non-existent, but the sky is definitely the focus. Unlike Steampunk, however, you can have a Skypunk set in medieval times or have it in the future. You'll find elements of these in Laputa, Castle in the Sky, Sky Islands in One Piece, or the floating city Zalem in Alita Battle Angel. We then move to a more disturbing genre of Splatterpunk, a gore fest of blood and graphic violence described as hyper-intensive horror with no limits. An unnecessarily detailed description of death and gore that reflects the moral chaos of our times. Very survivalist in nature and more specific than straight horror. And I don't personally read or watch horror-themed media at all, so I'm leaving this one up to you guys as well to come up with some examples. I trust that you get the gist of this genre. But a more familiar gothic fantasy would be more known as Dreampunk, so you get to replace the gore with suspense, and there you have it. The next one is another cousin of Steampunk, Steelpunk, but it focuses on the macro technology of steel in the 20th century, large metal contraptions with rivets. Not to be confused with the Dieselpunk, which is mostly about fuel, where Steampunk is mostly electronic. Steelpunk is mostly about the large battle suits, jetpacks, and giant robots. Take inspiration from Real Steel, The Iron Giant, Snowpiercer, and The Day After Tomorrow. And then we have Stonepunk, a very different genre set in the past as far as we can go. All it is using Stone Age technology in an extremely advanced way, even to the unlikely or impossible. It is a Neolithic revolution. An obvious media inspiration would be the Flintstones, but also take inspiration from Horizons Zero Dawn, Monster Hunter, or Far Cry Primal. And there are so much more punk genres that I didn't even mention in this video. Explore what is possible and make your games fun and different. If you want me to go more in-depth with how you can implement each of these genres in a D&D game, let me know in the comments below. And remember, to get my Higher Powers issue, if you do want more character and world building inspiration, you get that through the link in the description. I appreciate the support. But in the meantime, go out there and spread the good word of D&D and make the world a better place, both on and off the table. See you in the next one.